The following video contains footage from the Jordan Peterson vs. Matt Dillahunty debate hosted by Pangburn Philosophy. Shout out to Travis Pangburn for giving me the permission to feature said footage. Travis, you're the best. To watch the full Peterson-Dillahunty debate, or a whole host of other philosophical content, please see the links for Pangburn Philosophy in the description below. Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it.
I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write
But you act
poetry.
like you do.
Huh?
But you act like you do. That's why you didn't want to throw poor Sam off the stage.
So, I leave it open to you, dear listener. What is he saying? I think it's abundantly clear. I think it's blindingly obvious. Jordan Peterson is sitting there and telling Matt Dillahunty to his face, and by extension, telling the audience that he believes an atheist who not only claims to not believe in God, but acts like they don't believe in God would be the kind of person who would be willing to throw an innocent person off of the stage.
If you ever try to bullshit me like that again, I will rip off your arm.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to take a moment to make you aware of my Patreon, the link for which can be found in the description below. Sign up today for as little as £3 per month and you can gain access to a plethora of perks and extras, including downloadable audio-only and ad-free versions of my podcast that you can listen to on the go. You can also have your question answered in a monthly video, and better still, depending on which tier you choose, you could even sit down for a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. All that is available and much, much more. All you got to do is click the link in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all most welcome to another episode of the most annoying religious people. Up for today is a target, you might say, guest appearance of an individual who, quite honestly, I have wrestled with myself about in terms of whether or not to include them in this series. I'm speaking about Jordan Peterson.
Up yours, woke moralists.
He doesn't have very good opinions about atheists. He said many things that are questionable at the very least, but some things that are just downright despicable. And guys, that is the reason that I'm featuring Peterson in this particular series of videos. I would be lying to you. It would just be a bald-faced deception if I did not admit to you that Peterson's statements on atheists, if I didn't admit that they have infuriated me. Again, it would just be dishonest. And so I'm featuring Peterson in this series of videos because I think it's abundantly clear that he's religious, for starters.
Okay, quick question. Are you a Christian?
I suppose the most straightforward answer to that is yes.
The things that he said about atheists are just utterly despicable and infuriating to me. And so this series is called The Most Annoying Religious People. Well, Peterson might be one of the people in the world who I'm most annoyed by, period.
You sons of bitches.
But I'm not featuring Peterson here just to explain my annoyance with him. I also happen to think that his arguments in relation to atheism are terrible. So this is where we're going to get into the controversial territory, especially with those who believe that Peterson is an excellent thinker, and he might very well be in certain domains. Psychology, perhaps. He is a clinical psychologist after all, but his thoughts on atheism leave a lot to be desired. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the debate he had with one Matt Dillahunty, another hero, admittedly, of mine, someone who I have mentioned on the channel more times than I care to remember. So, leaving all of this, contextualization aside, leaving all of this build-up aside, I'm just going to dive right in here with this debate between Matt Dillahunty and Peterson. But there's one thing you need to be aware of before I show you the clip, because we are jumping into the middle of a conversation that, I'm just looking at it now, is in fact an hour and 43 minutes long. So it would be remiss of me to just dive into the middle of this without first giving you a little bit of explanation about how we got to this point in the conversation. First thing to be aware of is that earlier in the conversation, Matt and Peterson, or Matt Dillahunty and Jordan Peterson, discuss the example of throwing Sam Harris off of the stage.
Sam Harris and I had an argument in Chicago about free will, and I was pointing out that he could walk over and step off the end of the stage, or I could pick him up and carry him and drop him off the stage, and at the end, the effect would essentially be the same. But the conflict between those two is everything that I describe as will, whether you want to call it free or not. I think that's what we value. That's what we care about. I would be responsible for that action. I would be acting in opposition to what the other agent wanted. And I don't know that you have to...
And there would be something hypothetically wrong about that.
Yes.
They talk about this in order to elucidate on their thoughts regarding determinism, free will, and also morality. Then we get to this point in the conversation where the subject of atheism comes up, and you're going to hear a recapitulation of the Sam Harris example once again. However, the manner in which Peterson brings it up is incredibly circumspect and shines a very negative light in terms of what Peterson believes about atheists. Have a listen, and we'll meet back here in a moment to discuss it.
What is it that you fear we would lose if people stopped believing that there was a God?
See, there's a difference between thinking something and believing it, because to believe it, it has to be thought incarnated in some sense. It has to be embodied.
For years, I had this thing going where people would say, oh, and this is kind of what we're getting at from a different angle. I would say they would be afraid of what we would lose if we lost religion. And I basically said, demonstrate to me any benefit.
Oh, you'd lose art and poetry and drama and narrative and story.
Are there no godless artists and poets?
Well, there are artists and poets who think they're godless.
I can tell you that I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write
But you act
poetry.
like you do.
Huh?
But you act like you do. That's why you didn't want to throw poor Sam off the stage.
So there you have it. You just heard the reintroduction of the Sam Harris example. Peterson says that while Matt Dillahunty exclaims that he doesn't believe in God, Peterson responds and says, but you act like you do. That's the reason you wouldn't be willing to throw Sam off of the stage.
I can tell you that I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write
But you act
poetry.
like you do.
Huh?
But you act like you do. That's why you didn't want to throw poor Sam off the stage.
Now think about that for a moment, dear listener. Think about the implication here. I think the implication is obvious. A real atheist would be willing to throw an innocent person off of the stage. In other words, a real atheist would be despicable and immoral. This, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely and utterly despicable. Annoying doesn't even scratch the surface. This, in my view, is incredibly immoral. This, in my view, is bigotry in its most obvious form. To sit there on the stage alongside Matt Dillahunty, one of the atheist community's leading thinkers, and tell him that he's not really an atheist because he's unwilling to throw innocent people off of a stage, is absolutely insane. This is asinine, right? And I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, this just floors me. And when one considers the fact that Jordan Peterson is as popular as he is, when one considers how large his platform is and how many adoring fans he has around the world, it just beggars belief. It makes me wonder, are his fan base also and equally discriminatory when it comes to the question of atheists? Are his fans just ravenous anti-atheist types who think that real atheists are just immoral scumbags? Maybe that's how he got his following, in part at least, because if he's going around saying things like this about atheists, and yet his fan base continues to grow, one has to wonder about the moral compass of those that are following this man. This is despicable. This is despicable. Now look, let's focus on it here for a minute, because I'm just giving you my instantaneous kind of moral reaction here to hearing this clip. But he does say something interesting, right? He says that there is a distinction between what a person says they believe and how they act, basically.
See, there's a difference between thinking something and believing it, because to believe it, it has to be thought incarnated in some sense. It has to be embodied.
Now, I think that's actually a fair statement. I think that's true. We all know people in the world who say one thing and do another, right? So people who will tell you, oh yeah, I believe in honesty. I believe that honesty is the best policy. But then in their life, they tell lots and lots of lies. And so one can quite easily point out a contradiction between the stated belief and the behaviour. But when Peterson says that Matt Dillahunty acts like he believes in God, doesn't that import a massive assumption? Doesn't that basically just raise a whole other question? The question becomes, well, how do people who believe in God act? How do people who don't believe in God act? And is there any broad pattern there? Now, if we focus on that for a second and we think about Peterson's response, his answer to those questions becomes very clear. His assumption, and I don't think that I'm stretching here, I think it's pretty clear given what he said, especially when he mentions throwing Sam Harris off the stage once again, his assumption is that a religious person would not, a believer in God would not throw Sam Harris off of the stage. Whereas a genuine atheist, a person who genuinely did not believe in God and acted like they did not believe in God, that person would throw Sam Harris off of the stage.
I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write
But you act
poetry.
like you do.
Huh?
But you act like you do. That's why you didn't want to throw poor Sam off the stage.
So I leave it open to you, dear listener. What is he saying? I think it's abundantly clear. I think it's blindingly obvious. Jordan Peterson is sitting there and telling Matt Dillahunty to his face, and by extension, telling the audience that he believes an atheist who not only claims to not believe in God, but acts like they don't believe in God, would be the kind of person who would be willing to throw an innocent person off of the stage. Let's listen to Matt's response here and see what he says, and then I'll follow up with some additional thoughts in a moment.
You regard Sam Harris as an implicitly valuable entity, because otherwise you'd just throw him off the stage. And then the question is, well, just exactly why is he an implicitly valuable entity?
You didn't even attempt to ask me why I didn't throw Sam off the stage. Instead, you went to, why do you think Sam has implicit value? Because it seems that in your narrative,
I'm willing
that's
to go
the
there.
only justification.
Well, maybe you were afraid of being punished.
I think you can, no.
Oh,
I think
okay.
you can have a perfectly acceptable foundation for secular morality, even if it fundamentally centers around selfishness. I'd rather not be thrown off the stage. It's in my best interest to encourage that sort of understanding in others, and therefore I will not throw him off the stage. I would rather not have my stuff stolen, and it's in my best interest to encourage others not to do that, so I will not steal stuff, and I will work with others to ensure that the people who steal stuff are punished.
Just as a quick aside here, I want to point out that I think Peterson's follow-up here is, it's patently absurd. He alleges that the reason Matt Dillahunty wouldn't throw Sam Harris off of the stage is because Sam Harris has some kind of intrinsic moral worth as a human being. But this is a joke. I equally, and Matt presumably equally, wouldn't be willing to throw the table and chairs off of the stage. And yet tables and chairs don't have any moral worth. They don't have any intrinsic value. They're not conscious. They can't feel pain or pleasure. And so I would throw the ball back to Peterson's court. Why wouldn't I be willing to throw the table and chairs off of the stage, right? Perhaps because I'm just not a destructive individual. Perhaps because I'm just not a scumbag. Now, he might want to say it's because I'm carrying out or living out a religious ethic, but this is hugely problematic when you consider the history of religion. If Peterson is right, And believers in God would be less willing to throw Sam Harris off of the stage, whilst a real atheist would be more willing to throw Harris off the stage. How does one make this compatible with the history of religion, where religious adherents have committed all sorts of atrocities and crimes throughout history, right? Look at 9/11. Those people believed in God, and they flew those planes into those buildings, killing thousands of people and themselves in an act of martyrdom. We all know the last words that those hijackers shouted before impact, right? And we all know what their theology teaches them about what they were going to get for having carried out this atrocity and dying in the name of their faith. In fact, aren't all immoral behaviours permissible once they're carried out in the name of God? Genocide, torture, immiseration, it all becomes acceptable if God commands it. This is what's so ridiculous about Peterson's point. This assumption that religious morality is automatically and intrinsically more moral than anything that an atheist might have to offer. It's just asinine. Divine command makes morality arbitrary. When God commands the genocide of the Amalekites, that becomes an intrinsically moral action because God commanded it, and what God says is moral by definition. When God says that homosexuals should be stoned to death, that becomes an intrinsically moral act. In fact, you are a good person if you partake in said stoning. So this idea that Christian morality, or theistic morality more generally, is automatically and intrinsically better than anything that a secular humanist manifesto might have to offer, it's just a joke. At the end of the day, a la divine command theory, morality becomes arbitrary and all things become permissible. All God need do is command you, and you must do it. God could command you to quite literally murder, rape, and kill everyone. And according to divine command, those commands would be moral, and carrying them out would make you a moral person. Now, I don't want to just cherry pick, dear listener. I'm not trying to paint an overly negative picture of religion. I'm aware that religiosity can inspire people to do good as well, charity and goodwill and all of that stuff. Fine. But my point is that the negative side of religion poses a serious problem for Peterson's thesis here. If religious people would be unwilling to throw Sam Harris off of the stage, then how does Peterson account for all of the examples in religious history where religious people did, metaphorically speaking, throw Sam Harris off of the stage? How does Peterson account for the Crusades? How does he account for all of the terrorism that has been carried out in the name of religion? Right? How does he account for the immiseration of homosexuals, women, and people all around the world in the name of religion? How does he account for the fact that under religious prescriptions, the hands of thieves are removed in Saudi Arabia, right? How does he account for the death penalty? How does he account for the plethora of statements in the Bible that are death hungry and all in the name of God? The stoning of homosexuals, for example, or even children for that matter, as it points out in the Bible that any unruly child should be taken to the edge of town and stoned to death. There's a lot of bloodthirst in the Bible, despite its religious underpinnings. So this idea that religious people would just be intrinsically less likely to throw Sam Harris off of the stage because, as Peterson's follow-up indicates, religious people place more intrinsic value and moral worth in human beings.
You regard Sam Harris as an implicitly valuable entity.
That just doesn't follow from the history of religion. That just doesn't follow at all. If anything, depending on context, it's possible to draw the exact opposite conclusion, that religious people have very little worth and place very little value on those that are outside of their tradition or on those who violate their norms and prescriptions. How about that? How does this get reconciled into Peterson's view here? But I digress. Let's continue with the video.
My question is for you, Dr. Peterson. You alluded to an important distinction between someone who would actually be an atheist and someone who merely professes to be an atheist. What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov plots a murder, and he murders this horrible woman, who's horrible according to everyone who knows her, who also has enslaved her rather mentally feeble niece, and who does nothing but make people miserable consciously all the time. And he does that in order to save his sister from a rather sophisticated form of prostitution, to save himself from starvation so that he can become a great lawyer and help people. Right? So Dostoevsky sets up the stage. Here is the perfect situation for a murder, and all of the rational choices point in that direction. And he basically says, look, there is every rational reason to split this woman's skull with an axe. Look at all the good I would do. Look at all the well-being I would enhance. And so he does it. And then all hell breaks loose. See, Raskolnikov built himself up to the murder in part by laying out the rational case, but also by saying, well, there's no God. There's no metaphysical reason that's stopping me from committing this act. And there's all these reasons that appear perfectly rational, pushing me in that direction. Perhaps I'm nothing but a moral coward for failing to undertake it. So he does. But what he finds out is that he broke an inviolable moral rule, something that spoke to his own soul, so to speak. And the rest of the book basically involves his sequential post-traumatic unraveling.
So just in case there were any apologists in the audience who might have argued that my interpretation of the Sam Harris comment was inaccurate, i.e. that Peterson was genuinely suggesting that an atheist would be, a real atheist that is, would be more willing to throw Sam Harris off of the stage. If you were at all in doubt about my interpretation of that comment, it becomes crystal clear at this point in the debate. And just for the sake of transparency, there's been a huge time jump now in the debate because the what's a real atheist topic doesn't rear its ugly head again until the end of the debate in the Q&A. And so I've skipped to that point in the debate. If you want to watch the full debate, I will include the link in the description below. In fact, I would highly recommend you do that. But later on in the debate, when this topic comes up again, the questioner asks or recapitulates the question. So, what is a real atheist in your view?
What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
And Peterson, without missing a beat, and this is just appalling, he responds and says, a real atheist would be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment.
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment.
Now, I've read Crime and Punishment, and I take umbrage. I think this is a despicable statement. Raskolnikov, as you heard Peterson describe, carries out what you might call the perfect murder. He gets away with it, right? He kills this old woman, and he has all of his justifications. She's morally wicked, she's despicable, she's abusing people in her life, and so on and so forth. And Peterson imagines that that's what a real atheist, a quote, real atheist would be like. In other words, a real atheist would be the kind of person who would be willing to carry out the murder of an elderly woman, even though it's not necessary. F*** you, Peterson. F*** you. Honestly. I mean, I'm an atheist, although you wouldn't accept that I am, right? Because I'm not a murderer. But that is just asinine. That is absolutely despicable. Atheism is not about whether or not I'm moral. Atheism is about whether or not I believe in God. This is the problem. He's fusing morality into the conversation, and it need not be there, right? So when I say I don't believe in God, but yet I'm a good person, Peterson says that I must not be an atheist then, because he has grafted morality into the conversation. He has grafted immorality onto atheism. In other words, he's defining atheism as people who are immoral, people who are evil, people who are despicable, right? Now, you can play whatever game you want. You can define words however you like, but bad people also believe in God. There's lots of bad people. I've already made this point. There's lots of immoral, murderous, bloodthirsty people in the world who believe in God. But now Peterson might say, oh no, they're really atheists though, right? See, again, this is the problem with grafting morality onto the theism-atheism debate. Because the truth is, it's possible for a person to believe in God and be either good or bad. It's also possible for a person to not believe in any gods and be either good or bad. And I defy anyone to oppose that position. This is self-evidently true. This is the most obvious statement in the world. But you see, Peterson has pigeonholed the entire thing. And he has elected And he has concluded that if you do good things, then whether you are aware of it or not, you're actually a believer in God. And if you do bad things, whether you're aware of it or not, you're actually an atheist. And this is obviously despicable. But let's take this a little bit further. Let's humor his behavior point, right? If indeed the window into what somebody really believes is their behavior, let's look at the behavior of atheists. Let's look at the behavior of myself as an atheist. So I, as an atheist, spend an enormous amount of my spare time making videos about atheism, wherein I describe why I am an atheist. I go through the evidence and explain why, the evidence or lack thereof, that is, and I explain why I do not believe in God. Aren't these behaviors indicative of a person who doesn't believe in God? Furthermore, in my spare time, I spend a lot of time reading atheistic books. I attend atheistic events. I live an aggressively secular lifestyle. And if the examples I'm giving you thus far aren't enough, let me give you the cherry on top. And this is probably the most important piece of evidence which demonstrates my atheism. I could have gotten a teaching job in Ireland if, and only if, I were willing to indoctrinate children to believe in Jesus Christ. That is how the Irish education system works. 90% of the schools, last time I checked, that's the actual figure, by the way, 90% of the schools in Ireland are run under the patronage of the Catholic Church, and consequently, they enforce a Christian ethic. There are crucifixes in every classroom. There are people in holy orders that officiate various ceremonies and even teach certain lessons. And above all else, in religion class, one is taught that Christianity is true. More specifically, Catholicism is true, and that Jesus is your Lord and Savior. When I went to interviews in Ireland, I refused to do this. When I was asked in interviews how I'm going to bring children to the Lord, I told them that I'm not going to do that. Wouldn't this be the kind of behavior that you would expect from a person who genuinely does not believe in God? I literally resisted employment, despite the fact that I needed it. I refused to play that game. I refused it for so long that it became apparent that the only way I was going to be able to get a job in Ireland was if I swallowed my pride, swallowed my principles, and swallowed my beliefs. Isn't this the behavior of a genuine atheist, Dr. Peterson? And the story culminates in me literally leaving the country of my birth and moving to England, where I could get a job that didn't require that I indoctrinate children. And so that's what I ultimately did. I left the country of my birth and my family behind, and at that point in time, my then girlfriend, who's now my fiance, I'm happy to report. But I left them all behind and I came to England to get a job because I believe so stridently in my principles as a secular humanist and atheist. Are these not the behaviors of a genuine atheist, Dr. Peterson? Or am I really just a believer in God because I'm a good person? Don't make me sick. My behavior is demonstrative of my atheism. My behavior is demonstrative of the principles that I hold dear. Principles like those found in secular humanism. Principles unlike those found in Catholic Ireland, where children are indoctrinated, where teachers preach rather than teach. So I submit to you, Dr. Peterson, that I am the genuine article. I am an atheist, and my behavior and my beliefs demonstrate that fact. And they demonstrate that fact in spite of the fact that I am a moral person. In other words, I can both be moral and be an atheist. And the only way you can resist this point is if you tell me that I'm lying, or if you tell me that I am incapable of discovering what my own beliefs are.
Well, there are artists and poets who think they're godless.
And how nonsensical would that be? The only person who can genuinely tell you what I believe is me. And you have no business telling me anything to the contrary. Now, your initial point makes sense. It's possible that somebody can think that they believe something and yet their behavior demonstrates something else. But that happens in specific cases, right? It happens in cases of dishonesty. A person can be dishonest, or a person can be self-deceived. So if you're going to suggest that I'm self-deceived, or if I'm dishonest, well, I can only put myself in the faithful hands of the audience and You can tell me, dear listener, do I strike you as dishonest? Am I lying to you about being an atheist? And if I am, what is my goal here? Why have I made at this point in recording 125 plus videos about my atheism? Why would I do that if indeed I was lying? So the only other option that's left is that I might be self-deceived. But if I'm self-deceived, Peterson, then how can you know what you believe? Maybe your belief that an atheist would really be like Raskolnikov is actually just a self-deception and you don't really believe that. Maybe your belief that a real atheist would throw Sam Harris off the stage is just a self-deception. Maybe you don't really believe that. Maybe there's something else going on. So if you're going to go down this road of saying that we can't even tell each other what we really believe based on either beliefs or behaviour, and that we can just be self-deceived from the ground up, well, then your argument doesn't even get off the ground, because your argument might just be a self-deception in your thinking. So that just doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. It's hogwash. The truth is, when you say that real atheists would be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, what you're doing is holding up a huge middle finger to the atheist community, and you're telling us that you believe that if we were really atheists, that we would be murderers.
Now, in Dr. Peterson's case, you're not really an atheist, because in my mind, an atheist is someone who would be a murderer. And so I'm just, rather than saddle you with that, you just think you're an atheist, but really you're not. An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God. I am not convinced there's a God. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm convinced there are no gods, although that is a subset of, hey, I don't believe there's a God, and then there's a subset that is, I believe there are no gods. This is, as I've talked about previously, independent of whether or not I can be a moral being or do good things, is independent from whether or not there's awe and wonder or purpose and meaning in my life. While he thinks atheists would be murderers, he doesn't actually think you're an atheist. And that is his way of getting around acknowledging things that conflict with his worldview. I don't get to decide who is or isn't a true Christian. I didn't even get to decide that when I was a believer. I definitely don't get to do it now. So if somebody tells me they're a Christian, I'm going to have to accept that. I have a model in my head of what that means. I have a model in my head of what it means to be a Muslim, but I'm willing for them to explain to me what their model is. It's strange to me that I'm not sitting here with somebody like Ray Comfort when I'm told you're not really an atheist because you're too good to be an atheist. And this is what atheists hear all the time when they come out. They've been sidelined because of religious privilege around the world for years. And then atheists come out to their family members or friends or people they've known for years, and they're like, you're an atheist? How can that be? You're such a good person. I've known you all this time. It's because the mindset of what people have about what an atheist is has been poisoned by religious proclamations. We have been denigrated from the pulpit, and it has seeped into every aspect of culture, right up to the height of intellectual pursuits. And it's time for that to end.
Matt Dillahunty, of course, nails it in his final response to Peterson on this question, and he's absolutely spot on. Atheists have been denigrated from the pulpit for centuries. And so it's not surprising that people believe that an admission of atheism is, to one extent or another, an admission of being an immoral person. But that's because religion has been playing this game for centuries, suggesting that to reject their claims is to reject morality and to walk away from all that is good and holy. In other words, it is to abandon one's moral compass. But this is just an apologetic. This is just an assertion. And in fact, if you look at the world stage and you look at the countries that are atheistic, things seem to be going rather well, right? If you look at the Scandinavian countries, those nations aren't falling apart at the seams with murder, rape, and theft. In fact, they're doing much better on many fronts, moral and otherwise, economically, etc., than some of the most religious nations on earth. In fact, look at some of the most religious nations on earth. Look at Saudi Arabia and ask yourself, is that a model that we want to live by? Now, Peterson might suggest that they're not necessarily godly, but I mean, how does he justify that? How does he actually defend that position? Because these people tell us ad nauseum that they are believers in God. But you see, this is the problem, and I have to revisit this again. If you're going to decide that a person's beliefs are best determined by their behavior as opposed to what they tell you, you're going to run into all sorts of problems. Behavior can be a window into what somebody believes, but some beliefs don't necessarily come coupled with a behavior. For example, if I believe in God, but it's a deistic God, if I'm not a Christian, a Muslim, or a subscriber to any of the Abrahamic or theistic religions, and I just believe that there's a God who got everything started and then pissed off, and the universe now is what it is, and there's no intervention from a divine agent, there's no prayer answering, there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's just a divine being that started it all. What behavior would one expect to be coupled with that belief? One wonders. Because, in my estimation, I wouldn't expect there to be any particular behavior coupled with such a belief. That belief is an empirical belief, it is a factual belief, not to say that I believe it is a fact, but the person who believes it thinks it's a fact. And it is merely a belief about origins, about how things got started. I wouldn't expect that belief to have any knock-on effect in terms of that person's behavior, certainly not morally. How would believing in a dispassionate creator who got everything started and pissed off, how would that influence one's moral beliefs or their moral behavior? How would one's trajectory in terms of the behaviors they're going to carry out change as a consequence of coming to believe that proposition? It's not obvious to me that that would lead someone down one path or another. It's possible, in other words, for somebody to be a deist and be a scumbag, or be a deist and be a wonderful, moral, charitable human being. Sure, one could argue that believing in a deistic God means that you're not believing in a God that holds you morally accountable, and so therefore, dun dun dun, you can do whatever you like. You can go out and murder, you can go out and rape, you can go out and steal, etc., etc., etc. You could say that that's a possible knock-on effect in the behavior of a person who believes in a deistic God, because a deistic God, by definition, wouldn't be holding you accountable. Fine, you can say all of that, and that sounds great, but prove it. Where's the evidence of this? What are you talking about? Where is the evidence of rampant gangs of deist murderers? Show me the evidence that shows that a deistic notion of God reliably leads in the direction of moral degeneracy. And again, if you show me that data, I'll believe you. But that data doesn't exist as far as I'm aware. I've not seen it. Now, just because I've not seen it doesn't mean it's not there. Perhaps somebody's going to jump into the comments below and enlighten me, and I'm going to have to change my mind. Fair enough. But I've not seen that data, and I've been researching this for quite some time. There doesn't appear to be any strong correlation between atheism or deism or not following a theistic God and becoming a scumbag. In fact, the data runs in the opposite direction. Atheists are underrepresented in prison populations. They're underrepresented in crime statistics and so forth. And not just by virtue of the numbers alone, because obviously there's less atheists. I mean per capita, I mean percentage-wise, atheists are underrepresented across the board. So I would believe that if there was any evidence for it, but unfortunately there isn't. So again, I must restate the question. What behavior would one expect to be coupled with a deistic notion of God? And I'm at a loss for words there. So bringing this point to a close and extending an olive branch here, it is fair to say in Peterson's defense that certain beliefs do reliably correlate with particular behaviors. For example, if somebody believes that lying is acceptable, one would expect their behavior to be indicative of that belief. In other words, the person who believes that lying is permissible or acceptable probably tells more lies than a person who believes that it's not acceptable. Fair enough. But there are other beliefs that don't necessarily correlate with one particular behavior or another. I've given you some examples. A person who believes in a deistic notion of God. Who's to say what behavior one should or shouldn't expect from a person who believes that God is a guy who just started everything and then pissed off? That could go one way or the other. And you see, this is the problem. Peterson thinks that atheism is coupled with negative moral behavior. And he thinks this because he assumes that religiosity automatically makes someone a better person. But this just isn't the case. Religiosity can come coupled with awesome and amazing positive behaviour like charity and goodwill, but it can equally come coupled with despicable behaviour, genocide, and moral atrocity. So it's not clear to me that religiosity or theism more generally wins this competition in terms of the moral compass. But let's just imagine, for the sake of discussion, that Peterson is correct. Let's just imagine for a moment that behaviour really is the window into what somebody believes. Let's just take him seriously. Let's just grant that for the sake of discussion. Well, if murder makes you an atheist, if immoral behaviour makes you an atheist, if that is his contention, then how many religious people in the past were actually atheists and didn't realise it? Can you see the absurdity that this leads to? Any individual involved in the Crusades was actually an atheist. Any individual involved in the 9/11 hijackings was actually an atheist. Any individual who has ever been involved in any religious terrorism ever was actually an atheist, if indeed they murdered someone or tried to harm people. You see, this leads to absurdity. What happens if a religious person who's dedicated their whole life to the church, they go to church every day, let's imagine they're even a minister, if somebody breaks into their home and they have to shoot or kill the person in order to defend their family, is that them acting like an atheist? You see, guys, this is just absurd. This leads to ridiculous conclusions. The fact of the matter is this, and Matt Dillahunty is absolutely right. The only way we can determine what somebody believes is by asking them.
So if somebody tells me they're a Christian, I'm going to have to accept that.
And yes, sure, people can lie, people can deceive, and some people can even be self-deceived. You could have a person who genuinely thinks that they believe something, and because of some mental illness or schizophrenia, perhaps they don't really believe that thing. Fine. But these things are obviously exceptions. The fact of the matter is, if you ask me, Magic Skeptic, do you believe in God? And I tell you, no, I don't. You should take me at my word. And grafting morality onto the conversation and asserting that, no, Magic Skeptic, you're not really an atheist because you're a good person, is incredibly unhelpful. And it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense at all, because atheism has nothing to do with morality. There's no such thing as atheistic morality. Atheism is a proposition that is to do with one thing. The question is, do you believe in God? Atheists say no. It is a single belief on a single issue. There's no such thing as atheist morality. People ask these silly questions all the time. What's the atheist view on veganism? What's the atheist view on Trump? What's the atheist view on yada, yada, yada? There is no atheist view on anything other than the existence of God. It is a single belief on a single issue. And consequently, you can have atheists who are good, atheists who are bad, atheists who are murderers, atheists who are charitable individuals, and so on and so forth. And the same is true for religious people. You have religious people who are good, bad, and indifferent. So just before I wrap this up, I want to conclude by trying to steelman the proposition. You see, I've had this debate with friends and interlocutors for years now. Peterson, I mean. Debates about Peterson and debates about this specific statement of his, that a real atheist would be willing to throw Sam Harris off the stage, or a real atheist would be like Raskolnikov. And some of Peterson's fans and defenders have suggested that perhaps there's a misunderstanding at play in this argument, and that when Peterson uses the word atheist or when he uses the word theist, perhaps he's using it metaphorically, right? So when Peterson talks about Matt Dillahunty not really being an atheist, perhaps all he means is that Matt Dillahunty clearly has a value that he places above himself. Maybe that's what he means by the word atheist and theist. So a theist is a person who places something valuable above themselves, be it a morality or a god or something like that. So it could be a literal being, like a god, like the God of the Bible, or it could be a metaphorical being, like a moral compass or a particular ideal, right? So that's more of a metaphorical definition of a theist, whereas an atheist then would be a person who doesn't put anything above themselves, that they are the most valuable thing. So if we run with this, let's imagine that that's what Peterson actually means. Do his statements make more sense then? Well, if that's how you're defining it, then it would be fair to say that Matt Dillahunty isn't an atheist, because by his own admission, he does place things above himself. He sees great value in secular humanism. He sees great value in his particular moral system, right? And so that could be the thing, the metaphorical value or God, if you will, that he places above himself. Fine. But if that is the game that Peterson is playing, I still have a critique here. If indeed he's fundamentally and radically reinterpreting the words theist and atheist to be talking about a metaphorical God or something above yourself, that might not be a literal being or a sky god, might just be a moral compass or something of that nature, a particular value, right? If that's the game he's playing, this is still hogwash. This is still nonsensical, because he does nothing in this debate to clarify that. If that was the game he was playing, and I don't happen to think it was, if that was the game he was playing, why didn't he say that? Why would he allow Matt Dillahunty to respond? Clearly, Matt Dillahunty is responding to Peterson's claims as though he's using the typical usage, the common parlance usage of the word atheist and theist. When Peterson says, oh, you don't really act like an atheist, though, because you'd be willing to throw Sam Harris off of the stage, Matt Dillahunty responds to that, understandably, angrily, as yet another example of atheists being denigrated, atheists being called immoral, atheists being compared with Raskolnikov or murderers of that nature.
We have been denigrated from the pulpit, and it has seeped into every aspect of culture, right up to the height of intellectual pursuits. And it's time for that to end.
Clearly, Matt Dillahunty is responding to Peterson's claims with the typical usage of the word atheist, the common parlance usage of atheist, that being a person who does not believe in a literal God, or any literal gods for that matter.
An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God.
So why doesn't Peterson step in here? So the fact that he doesn't step in here, if we want to, extend some charitable will here, maybe he just felt that he didn't have time. Maybe the debate was so crazy that he failed to get an opportunity to interject. Maybe because they were on a time constraint, he failed to mention that. But guys, this debate is 1 hour and 43 minutes, and there were several soliloquies that were presented by Peterson. So I can't buy that. If Peterson is really talking about these words in a metaphorical sense, he had ample opportunity to explain that's where he's coming from. There is no defense here in terms of time constraint. There is no defense here in terms of the business of the debate or not having had an opportunity. He had ample opportunity to explain this idiosyncratic usage of these words, if indeed that was the game he was playing. But he didn't do that. But again, I'm going to steel man it even further. Let's imagine that really was the game he was playing and that he just failed to find an opportunity to explain that fact. Even then, I have a critique for Peterson. I've been reading a book lately. This book is called Logic, A Complete Introduction. This book was written by one Dr. Sue Fan Lee. I'm almost through it. It's a phenomenal book. It's a really, really incredible read. And I'm going to include the link in the description below, by the way. I think this book is indispensable. I think every single one of my subscribers should read this book. I'm not getting any kickback from this, don't worry. But yeah, I think you should all read it. It is a phenomenal work, and it will absolutely help you in your argumentation and in your identification of fallacious reasoning and so on. But there was one very interesting chapter in the book, one very interesting section, where Dr. Sue Fan Lee, we'll just say Dr. Lee from this point onwards, Dr. Lee gives some rules, logical rules for definition, right? Lee includes 5 rules, and they are as follows. A definition should state the essential attributes of the species. Species is just a particular word that's used to refer to the thing being defined. Fine. Does Peterson do that? Yes, he does. So he says an atheist is a person who's going to be like Raskolnikov. An atheist would be a murderer. So yeah, he passes on the first step of providing a definition. Fine. A definition must be neither too broad or too narrow. And again, I think he passes this test. The third test is that a definition must not be circular. Fair enough. His definition isn't. An atheist is a murderer. That's how he's defining what an atheist is. There's no circularity there. He passes the third test. The fourth test is where we run into problems. And this is where Peterson's definition, again, assuming this steel man that I'm erecting here, that he's actually using the word atheist and theist in a metaphorical fashion. The fourth test of a definition is what follows. A definition must not be expressed in ambiguous, obscure, or figurative language. Definitions are tools to clarify meaning. Therefore, it is expected that the definiens is easier to understand than the definiendum. A definition using ambiguous, obscure, or figurative language is counterproductive and self-defeating to the purpose of definition. And therein lies the problem, guys. Peterson's definition is problematic because it's using language that's ambiguous, obscure, and figurative. And this is all on the assumption of this steel man. If Peterson is using the word atheist and theist in a metaphorical sense, that a theist is somebody who simply puts a value above themselves, a metaphorical god, if you will, well then he needs to use a word other than theist. Or at the very least, when he uses the word theist, he needs to clarify that he's using an idiosyncratic version of the word. Guys, you've heard me say this on the channel before. I'm all about multiple usages. People can use words however the hell they like. Words are tools. But those tools can be used well or they can be used poorly. And if indeed Peterson is using a metaphorical version of the word theist and a metaphorical version of the word atheist, that is undoubtedly a figurative, obscure usage. In common parlance, when somebody refers to an individual as a theist, the most common understanding is that you're talking about somebody who believes in a god. On the question of atheism, in common parlance, the word generally refers to a person who does not believe in any literal god or gods. So guys, if he's using these words metaphorically or figuratively or obscurely, as I would put it, then the burden is on him. He has a responsibility to explain that, and he doesn't. So for any of the Peterson fans out there who are going to try and jump down my throat and suggest that I just don't get Peterson and that he's using these words in a figurative and metaphorical way, well, my criticism still stands. If indeed he's doing that, Peterson first of all fails the definition test according to logicians, and even if he wanted to use the words in this obscure and metaphorical way, which he can do by the way, it would still be incumbent upon him to explain that he's using the words in this idiosyncratic manner, and he doesn't do that. So at best, Peterson is guilty of failing to communicate effectively. This reading, of course, only works if you accept the interpretation that Peterson was using the terms atheist and theist in a metaphorical manner, which is to say that he was using them in an obscure and idiosyncratic way. If that is the case, Peterson is guilty of failing to clarify this usage, and failing to clarify is a no-go. If indeed you're going to define something, as Dr. Lee points out, one of the things you must do is clarify. And if Peterson is failing to do this, then he is guilty at the very least of poor communication. At worst, however, Peterson is guilty of something much more sinister, and that is bigotry. It's clear to me that Peterson harbors terrible and abhorrent opinions about atheists. From his perspective, a quote, real atheist would be not unlike Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment, which is to say that real atheists have more in common with murderers than anything else. This is an absolutely despicable point of view. But worse still, the manner in which Peterson defends this point of view is insane. In order to defend this proposition, Peterson must reject Matt Dillahunty's claim that he is an atheist. He also has to reject my claim that I am an atheist. In other words, Peterson has to reject the claim of any atheist that they are in fact an atheist simply because they don't murder people. This is an absolutely insane way of having a conversation. If you're going to enter the conversation by denying the reality of a person's own mind and their ability to relay that mindset to you, then what is the point in even having a conversation? That makes absolutely no sense. And as I've pointed out in this video, it's a non-starter anyway, because if indeed we're not scrutable to ourselves in any sense, and if human beings are fundamentally incapable of relaying what they really and sincerely believe, well then Peterson would be equally incapable of doing this. And his views about atheists, and his view that atheism is intimately connected to murder, or that theism is intimately connected to morality, all those views might also be folly. Maybe you don't really believe that, Peterson. Maybe your views are not indicative of what you really behave like. And in fact, your behaviour on that stage with Matt Dillahunty was pretty damn immoral, so maybe you're an atheist according to your own standard. My point is that this is a ridiculous way to have a conversation. It is absolutely and abundantly clear that there exists atheists, such as myself, who have no belief in any God proposition whatsoever, and yet live out a moral life. And your assertion to the contrary needs evidence. It needs more than mere assertion. So, with all that said, do you agree with my criticism? Have I gotten him wrong? Jump into the comments below if you agree with what I've said, or if you have any constructive criticism about how you might have approached his arguments differently. If indeed you enjoyed the video, drop a like in it, and other than that, if it's your first time visiting the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, make sure you check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things on the channel, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. I want to conclude by extending an extra special thank you to my patrons. Your generosity is astonishing, and I'm blown away consistently. So thank you for just everything, guys. Sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, I love you. You are the best. And so if you want to become a Patreon like those I've mentioned, you can jump into the description below, follow the link, and you'll be able to sign up for as little as £3 per month, and you will gain access to a plethora of perks, bonuses, and extras. Other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching this video. And now, as an atheist, I'm off to do some murdering, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.
Up yours.